Hey, what's up, microchurch? This week we're going to be in Mark chapter 6, verses 45 through 56. And last week we talked about Jesus feeding the multitudes, feeding the 5,000 or most likely probably 10 to 12,000. This week we're going to be looking at Jesus walking on the water. And so I want to ask you this question: How often does God do something for you? God does something extraordinary for you, something amazing for you. Yet in the end, we still have a hard time believing it to be true, or we still have a hard time believing that we might deserve it. Here's the deal: Paul David Tripp said this, that there is this radical difference between amazement and faith. Right? Every one of us can become amazed by the things that we don't put our faith in. But how often do we really put our faith in something, in God's goodness and His faithfulness, when we face different trials and struggles and storms that we go through in life? For example, I'm amazed by skydiving. Right? I think that it looks incredibly thrilling. It looks like an amazing experience, but I will never, ever put my faith in a little pull cord or a piece of fabric, ever. Right? That's crazy talk. Right? My wife would, but I won't. I won't do it. Right? That's a hard pass for me. But it's still amazing. I love watching it on YouTube or something like that. Fair rides are the same way, right? They're an amazing thing to see. They're an amazing thing to watch, but I'm not going to put my faith or my trust in someone being able to put that up in just a few hours. And so the truth is that there really is this radical difference between amazement and faith. And today we're going to see this play out in the lives of the disciples and the encounter that they had with Jesus walking on the water. And so let's check it out. Mark chapter 6. Starting in verse 45, it says, immediately he, meaning Jesus, made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowds. And so what had happened is all these people gathered around him, and in John chapter 6, we kind of see this political uprising take place. The people were coming at Jesus saying, Jesus, you need to be king, Jesus, king. And trying to make him the king right then and there. And so Jesus sends his disciples away and says, go to the other side of the lake. And he makes them get into the boat, and he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, and he meant to pass them by. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought that it was a ghost, and they cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. It says, when they crossed over, they came to the land at Gennesaret and moored to the shore. And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him and ran about the whole region and began to bring the sick people on their beds to wherever they heard that he was. And wherever he came, in villages and cities or in countrysides, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and implored him that they might touch even the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched it were made well. Right, so what we have here again is Jesus sending his disciples to the other side. This political uprising takes place. Jesus sends his disciples away. But what we need to know here is Jesus sent his disciples into a storm. Right, he sent them into the storm at night, all on their own. Right, the disciples simply obeyed Jesus. They followed Jesus' commands. They left. They started rowing across the lake, and this windstorm came up. And here's the deal. They weren't there because of their disobedience. They weren't there because of their brokenness or their stubbornness or because of their sin. They were there because that's exactly where Jesus wanted them to be. Right? Jesus wanted to teach them something about himself, something that they still needed to learn. And Jesus does the same with us. Right? Jesus sends us into situations, he sends us into places that we would never intend to go. And he does this so that he can produce in us what we could never produce on our own. See, most of the time when this happens, when we are in a situation that we don't want to be in, our first question is, why? Why, Lord, am I having to go through this? Why am I being punished? Why do I deserve this? But we never stop to think that Jesus may have actually sent us into that situation for a specific reason. Right? We want to think that when Jesus sends us or leads us, it's going to be smooth sailing and he's going to protect us from any harm or danger, and he's going to make it really easy for us. But as we see in this passage, that's not always the case. I think sometimes God sends us into the storm so that we can experience his transforming grace. And that's exactly what this is in this passage. When Jesus leads us or he sends us into a storm or into a situation in life where we don't want to be or we don't want to go, he's doing it so that he can produce in us something that we could never produce on our own. Right? That's the gift of transforming grace. It's not easy grace. It's not comfortable grace. In fact, it's usually very uncomfortable, but it's still grace nonetheless. And it's grace because God is doing something and he is producing something inside of us, like I said, that we could never produce on our own. All right, the second thing that we need to see in this passage is this. Jesus comes to us. Right? He comes to us. He went out to them. He saw them struggling on the water, and he went out to them. He was up on the mountains praying. He was communing with the Father, and he was in the Father's presence, and he looked out towards the sea, and he saw his disciples struggling. The disciples, what we know is that they were probably at the end of their rope. Right? They were struggling. They were fighting to make headway towards their destination. They've been at it for hours. They left at evening time, and now it was sometime around 3 a.m., many scholars believe, and they were just exhausted. They were helpless. They were at the end of their own ability. They were at the end of their resources, and they couldn't do it. Right? They couldn't do it on their own. And Jesus saw them, and he had compassion on them, and he walked on water. Right? Think about that for a minute. I want to pause the whole thing for a moment and think about the fact that Jesus walked on water. I think most of the time we read this and we think, cool story, bro. Jesus walked on water. Yeah, I get it. This is huge, right? This is a huge moment. Jesus walked on the water. He wasn't barefoot skiing, right? He wasn't like walking on some shallow shelf or something like that. He was walking on the water. He was taking a stroll on top of the water as if it were solid land. And if this doesn't prove or point to the divinity of Jesus, I don't know what will. I don't know what would do it. Right? The fact that Jesus walked on water should reveal to us that he is fully God, that he is the creator and the sustainer of the universe. And he went out to them. Listen, Jesus, he went to his disciples, he chased after them, he walked out to them in this raging sea, and he does the same for us. He chases after you, and he chases after me. Jesus is more committed to our salvation than he is to our own definition of happiness. Jesus is more committed to redeeming us and restoring us than he is our desire for satisfaction with something other than himself. Jesus chased after the disciples, and he chases after you, and he chases after me in the same way because he's committed to us. Now, what I want us to also notice is Jesus, he doesn't get out to this moment and immediately calm the storm. In fact, Mark tells us that he intended to pass them by. I don't think that Jesus was trying to sneak by them or anything like that. I think he wanted them to see him, but he wanted them to see him because he wanted to reveal to them exactly who he was. He was trying to change their worldview. And so when things in life aren't going as we want them to, we typically want to blame someone. Right? We typically want to blame someone else. And so we start doubting everything. We start doubting ourselves. We doubt others. We doubt God. We doubt his goodness. We doubt his word. But in this moment, Jesus is trying to reveal himself to the disciples as Yahweh, as the Lord God Almighty, because he wanted them to see and to know that we are never alone in this life. He is always present. We don't have to try and get by on our own anymore. We don't have to rely on our own abilities. We don't have to rely on our own strength and our own wisdom, our own experience, because God is with us and he is for us. And so Jesus invaded this moment in this big and miraculous way to show that he invades every moment of our lives and that we are never alone, ever. And the reality is what Jesus is doing is he is giving the disciples this physical picture, this physical representation of the gospel in this very moment. He is revealing to them his redeeming good news. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. The third thing that we see in this passage is Jesus is with us. Right? We are never alone. Jesus gets out there and he says, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." That phrase, "it is I," is literally Jesus saying, "Take heart, I am." Right? Is in this very moment, Jesus not only revealed his deity by walking on the water, right? He took on the name of the Lord. He took on the name of Yahweh, the great I am. Right? The same name that God gave to Moses in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, when he said, "I am who I am." Right? So Jesus in this very moment is saying that the God of the universe, the God who created the world, the God who created everything in it, the God who set the stars in place, the God who gave us life, who made a covenant with his people and delivered them out of slavery, the great I am is now with you. And the same is true. He doesn't leave us. Jesus doesn't always rescue us from the storms, but he's always with us in the storms, right? That's the big takeaway from this passage. He doesn't always rescue us from the storms, but he's always with us in the storms. And so often I think we want to be amazed by Jesus calming our storms. We want to be amazed by Jesus relieving us from our hardships, that sometimes we miss the grace that Jesus is actually giving us. The disciples missed it in this moment. They missed the gospel picture from the bread all the way to this moment. And Mark tells us their hearts were hardened and they didn't understand. And so let's not miss this. Right? God sends us into this world. He sends each and every one of you, and he sends me to make disciples who make disciples, to connect people to life with the good news of Jesus Christ. He comes to us in our trials. He comes to us in our tribulations, and he is with us through it all. And the disciples witnessed many amazing things that followed this moment. They saw Christ heal so many people because those people believed. And so let's not miss it. Let's step out into this world, right, from wherever it is you're at right now, knowing that it won't be easy, but that we can fully trust that Jesus will always be with us through the power of the Holy Spirit in our lives.